Hey guys, my name is Confident, and in this video I'd like to show you how to create an admin dashboard using React Admin. We're going to be covering core React Admin concepts such as data providers, resources, the list view, the create view, and filters. This is going to be a really packed video, so I'm going to leave timestamps below to help you navigate through this video. And I also like to mention that React Admin requires that you have an API ready. If you do not have one, we made a video previously to help you quickly generate one using Loopback. So please make reference to that video. Alright, so let's get started. So this is what we're going to be building. We're going to be building a dashboard to manage rentals for a local movie store. And that dashboard is going to have two pages. The first is the customer page and the other is the rentals page. On the customer page, we can see that we have a table showing a list of customers, and we can quickly browse through the customers using this table. On that same page, we also have a kind of search input where we can search for customers by email. Going to the rentals page, we can see a list of all rentals that have been performed. And like the customers page, we can browse through those rentals. And more importantly, we can update the status of a rental. Say, for example, a customer has returned a movie he borrowed. We can update the status from borrowed to returned. And we can save that, and that will be updated. Going to the customers page, we can also view rentals of a particular customer. Say, for example, we want to see all the rentals Nancy has made. All we need to do would be to click on that customer, and then we are taken to the rentals page where we can see all the rentals for that particular customer. So this is the dashboard we'll be building to manage movie rentals. Before you begin, it is quite important to know that React Admin requires that you have an API ready. So I already have an API running here on port 4000, and I can open that up in the browser where you can see the API. This API was generated using Loopback, and here I have an explorer for me to see everything that is going on in this API. So if you do not have an API, please get one ready to use because React Admin requires you have an API. Alright, so let's get started. Let's head over to VS Code. Here I have a terminal open. And the first thing I'll need to do would be to create a React app for the project. So I'll be using the Create React App library for that. npx create React app. And now I can supply the app name I want to create. Let's call this rental admin panel. And the package would be created. So let's just give this some time to create the project for us. Alright, so the project has been created for us by Create React App. What we need to do now is to open it up. So I'm just going to cd into it, and I'm going to open it up in VS Code. Here we have a project opened up in VS Code. So the next thing we need to do would be to install React Admin inside of this project, and we also need to install the React Admin Loopback provider. We are installing the React Admin Loopback provider because the API we have is a REST API generated by Loopback. So we'll need a Loopback data provider so that React Admin can understand the API. If you have a REST API or a GraphQL API, please check the React Admin documentation so that you can install an appropriate data provider for your use case. So let's go ahead to install React Admin. And we'll also be installing the React Admin Loopback provider. Alright, so while this is installing, I would need to do some cleanup in the project directory. I'm going to be deleting the app.css. I'll also delete the index.css, the logo.svg, I would need to remove this import. And the app.js, let's clear up this. So I'm done with the cleanup. I just need to give this some time to finish up with downloading the React Admin package and the React Admin loopback for provider. Alright, so that is done with installing, and now we can go ahead to use these packages we have installed. So I'm just going to import a few components from the React Admin package. The first package I'll be importing would be the admin package and the resource package. So let's quickly do that. React Admin. And I also need to import the loopback data provider we have installed. Alright, so we have the packages imported, and now let's go ahead to make use of them. The first package I'll be making use of would be the admin component, and I would need to supply a data provider props to it. This is where we get to link with the API that we have. Remember that I showed you earlier we have an API running on port 4000. It's a loopback API, so we'll be linking React Admin to that API right here. For the value of these props, I would need to pass the LB4 provider. Again, data providers are mechanisms that React Admin uses to understand the API, such as how to filter the API, paginate the API, and do all of that. So if you're not using a loopback API, please check out a data provider for the API you're making use of. And here we can pass in the port of our API. So in my case, it is going to be HTTP localhost port 4000, and that's for the admin component. The next thing I'll need to do would be to register the routes I would like to use from this API right here using the resource component. So using the resource component, I would like to register the customer route, because going back to the API, you can see that I have 3 routes. I have the customer route, I have the films route, and I have the rentals route. So I'll need to register each of these in loopback using the resource component. So let's head back to the code. For the name props, I'll be supplying the route name, which the first I have is customer. And then I can close this up. So I've saved that, and now we can go ahead to start off the project. Alright, so I have the project started off, and you can see it's a bit empty. But we have a few components here coming from the React Admin package. The first thing we need to do would be to create a table that shows all customers, as we have here in the finished sample. So let us head back and do just that. I can close up the terminal. And in the source folder, I'm going to create a new folder called components. And in this folder, I'm going to create a new file called customer list.js. And it is just going to be a React component. So I have that set up. Let's give this a proper name. And to build this component, I'll need a few packages from React Admin. So let's import that. The first package I'll be needing will be the list component. I'll also need the data grid component, and I'll need a few text field components. Alright, so now we can go ahead to start using these components for the props. The list component will be the first I'm going to be making use of, and I'll go ahead to spread the props I'm pulling in here. And inside of the list component, I'm going to be using a data grid component. And that data grid component would house all of the text field components that I want showing up on the table. So I'm going to be using the text field component, and the text field component takes a source property, and that's all for the text field component. The value of the source property is the property on that route that we want shown up on this table. So heading back to the API, we can see that for the customer's route, each customer has an ID, has a store ID, has a first name, has a last name, email, address ID, active book, create date, last update date, and the active property. So I can show this up on the table if I want to using a text field, and I can reference what property I want to show using the source property. So let's head back to the code. The first thing I want to be shown up in the table is the ID property. So I'm just going to have this. But before writing that, I can copy this up because I am going to be using this a few times. Alright, so we have the ID property. The next thing I want showing up on the table would be the first name. And I also have the last name showing up, the email. And lastly, I want to also have the active bool property showing up. We can also rename what is shown on the table using the label property. So I can say label, and let's label this to active. I'm just going to save this. And what we need to do next would be to use this list in the customer resource. So let's head back to the app.js. I'll need to use the component I just created as the list component for the customer resource. So let's quickly do that, list. And for its value, I'm going to be using the customer list. Hitting enter is going to auto import it for me so that I don't have to manually do that. And here we have everything showing up. So let's save this and let's head back to the browser to see what we have. All right, I'm heading back to the application, and we can see that we already have the customer table showing up. We can easily paginate this table using the next button, and we can see that it's really easy to browse through all the items we have. And like we said, while building up the table, it is only the items I specified using the text field that gets to show up right here on the table. And we can see the active bool has been renamed to active right here on the table. Going back to the reference app, the last thing we need to do on this page would be to add a kind of search input so that we can search for customers by email. We can easily do that using the filter component. So let's head back to the code and quickly do that. So we need to create a new filter component. So let's call this customer filter. It's going to have some props. And for us to build this component, we'll need a few new components from React Admin. The first component we'll need from React Admin will be the filter component. And we'll also need the search input component. Alright, so now we can go ahead to use this built-in component to build our customer filter component. So let's make use of the filter component. We'll need to spread the props. And inside of the filter component, we can make use of the search input component. The first property that this search input component would have would be a placeholder. That is what will be shown when the input is empty. So let us see customer email. The next would be a source property. So this will be the field we want to search by. And in this case, it is going to be the email property. And lastly, we will configure this search input to be resettable. And we want this to be always on. So we have the search inputs configured. Now we can go ahead to use this filter in the list component. So we can pass it on the list component like this. And then let us pass the filter component right here. And that's how we can make use of it. So I'm going to save this and let's head back to the browser to see if everything we have is working fine. And right here, we can see that we have a filter component showing up. We can search this table by customer email. So let's try that out. I am going to copy this customer's email. I'm just going to copy this and I'm going to paste it here to search. And we can see that the search functionality we just created works because the customer we're searching for is showing up right here. So let's close this and we have that showing up. So heading back to the reference app, the next thing we would need to build is a rentals table. And this is going to be very similar to what we have in the customers table. We need to create a rentals list. We also need to be able to filter by ID. So I'm just going to do exactly the same thing I showed that you saw while building the customer table. So let's head back to the code and we're going to do exactly just that. Alright, so here we are in the code base and like we did for the customers route, we also need to register a new resource. And in this case, this would be the rentals resource. So let's call this resource and for the name, this will be rentals, which corresponds to the name of the rentals route. Rentals, and we can close this off for now. So let's go ahead to create a new list. So let's call this rental list. So I'm just going to paste in something I have copied and I'm going to save this. So you can see that what we have here is pretty similar to what we have in the customers list. We have a filter component that allows us to search by ID in this case. And in the list component proper, we have a few text fields showing up some properties from the rental resource. We have the ID showing up, we have the film title showing up, the status, the customer email, the rental date, and the return date. So I can save this, and then let's head back to the app.js file and use that list component as the list component for the rentals resource. So let's call this list, and this will be rentals list. So I'm going to save this and let's head back to the browser and see if everything works fine. So let's reload the browser. And here we have a table showing up rentals. So I can see all the rental resources we have in the database. I can quickly page through them and I can also search by ID, say ID 100 for example. And we can see that rental record showing up right here. So let's close this. The next thing we need to do would be to create a functionality which will enable us to edit a rental. And for that, we would need an edit component just like we did for the table resource. So let us head back to the code and let's create this edit component. Under the components folder, I'm going to create a new file. Let's call this rental edit. And I'll need to import a few things. Alright, so I have the basic structure of the component set up. Now I'll need to import a few things from React Admin. The first thing I'll need to import would be the edit component. So let's go ahead to make those imports. So let's import the edit component. We'll also need the simple form component. We'll need a few text inputs, date inputs, and select inputs. So let's import that. Select input. All right, so we have all the components we would need. Let's go ahead to create the edit component. So this will be edit, and we're going to spread the props. Now we can use the simple form component. And here we can specify what properties we want to edit using the text inputs, the date input, and the select inputs we have. So let's go ahead and use those input widgets. So as you can see, the text input component is very similar to the text field component we have over here. We have a source property which points to which property of the document we are talking about. So the same idea is also used here. Now we can go ahead to point to which property we want to be editing, and in this case that will be the ID property. I'm going to paste this a few times so that we'll make use of it. We also want the film title to show up in the form, so let's add the film title property. And the same also goes for the customer email. But for these properties, we do not want them to be editable. Although we want them to show up in the form, but we do not want them to be editable. So what we need to do right here is to add the disabled property. And we can go on to add that same property for the other two components we have here. We also want to show up the rental date for the document we'll be editing. So we need to use the date time input, and we want this to be disabled also. We want this to be pointing to the rental dates, and we have that configured. All right, so lastly, we'll need a select input that will allow us to update the status of the selected item. So let's use the select input, and this would be updating the status. So for the source property, this is going to point to status. And we'll also need to provide a choices that would be used to build the options. So we need to provide an array of choices. So I already have something configured. I'm just going to paste that in. And here we can close the component. All right, so right now we have the edit form built. So I'm just going to save this. Now we can head back to the app.js file, and we can use this edit component as the edit form for the rentals resource. So let's use that right now. So for edit, we can pass the rental edit component. We can save that. And lastly, we want it such that whenever a user clicks on an item from the edit table, he's taken to the edit form for that particular item. So let's head back to the rental list, and in the data grid property, we want to add a row click action. We want to be taken to the edit form for the row click action. So I'm going to save this, and let us head back to the browser. So I'm going to reload the browser, and here we have the rental list showing up. So clicking on an item, we should be able to edit that item. So I'm going to click on the first item right here. And now we are taken to the edit form for that item. Here we can see the item's ID. We can see the film title, the customer email who borrowed that film, the rental date, and now we can update the status from borrowed to returned, for example, and saving that would update that rental. Going back to the reference app, the last thing we need to do would be to make a create flow so that new rental records can be saved using this dashboard. So let's head back to the reference app. Let's head back to the app, and we need to create a rental flow. So for that, just like we did for the edit flow, we'll create a create component, and then use that as the create component for the rental resource. So let's do just that. So I'm creating the component. Let's call this rental create. So I'm just going to paste in something I have copied. So right now we can see that we have the create component, and you notice it's really similar to what we have in the edit component. So we have a create component and a simple form, and taking a look at that, we can see that it is essentially the same shape as what we have in the edit component. We have the text inputs, we have select inputs, and we have the date time inputs. The reason why we are having a little bit more code right here is because I am creating a list of customers and a list of films using the use query hook. Say for example, in this query, I'm getting a list of customers, and what I'm doing when that list has been fetched from the API, I'm creating an array of customer ID, and then I am passing it into the select input for customers. And I'm doing exactly the same thing for the films select input. I'm making a request right here, and when that is gotten, I am creating a list of film titles and passing it as the choices array to the select inputs we have right here. So I'm just going to save this, and what I'd like to do would be to go back to the app.js file and set that component we have just created to be the create component of the rentals resource. So for create, I'm going to pass in rental create, and I'm going to save this. So let's head back to the browser and test this out. I'm going to reload this, and here we have a create button showing up. So I can click on this and then create a new rental. I can select the customer email. I also can select the film title. The status is hard-coded to borrowed, and for the rental date, I can set today to the rental date. Saving that is going to create the new record, and I can see that showing up right here on the table. Alright, so that has been creating a table. I think we have one more thing to do. We also want to configure it such that when a customer is selected on the table, we are taken to the rentals page, and there we can see all the rentals made by that particular customer. So let's quickly configure that. Heading back to the editor, and in the customer list, we want to set a row click action whenever an item is clicked. So let's quickly do that. For the row click action, instead of specifying a path using a string, we can also pass in a function to the row click action. So in this case, that function would return a string that will take us to the rentals route and filter by the customer ID that was clicked on the table. So let's quickly configure that. So we're going to be passing a function. And for the props, we would be receiving the ID, the base path, and the record from the row click handler. So let's quickly return a string that would take us to the rental page with the customer ID filter applied. And I'm going to paste something I have over here. So we're just going to return this. And what this would do is that it is going to take us to the rentals page. And as I said earlier, it is going to filter by the customer's email. So let's save this, and I'm going to head back to the browser to test to see if this works. Alright, let's go back to the customers table. I'm going to reload this. And then clicking on the first customer, for example, should take us to the rentals page with that filter applied. And we can see that works because we are returned with a list of rentals by that particular customer. Alright, so we have created the table we set out to make at the beginning of this video. So this is how you can use React Admin to quickly create a dashboard. I hope you found this video helpful, and if you did, please leave a like and get subscribed. I'll see you in the next video.